The rebels were now safely back in Whispering Woods, and He-Man had become Adam once more. Glimmer was arguing with him.
You'll be captured for certain if you go back to the Fright Zone, Adam.
Sorry, Glimmer. I've a mission that must be performed, safe or not,
said Adam. He looked down at Cringer.
You'll have to stay here, Cringer. You're too noticeable.
He said goodbye to the rebels and left. On the roof of Doom Tower, Hordak was admiring a huge ray machine. He turned to Shadow Weaver and Adora.
At last, it is finished. A thing of beauty. It's my new Magna Beam transporter. See the old battle wagon? I know you are so.
Hordak pressed a button, and the wagon shimmered for a moment, then vanished.
Where did it go?
Asked Mantenna.
Look,
Hordak, pointing to the view screen.
It's gone to the Valley of the Lost. No one ever returns from there. When my Magna Beam is at full power, I shall send all the rebels there, and we'll have no more trouble. Let's go down to the plunder room. I'll show you how to charge it up.
Down in the plunder room, Hordak villains that willpower, and a lot of it was needed to charge up the Magna Beam. The guards locked a prisoner into the Magna Beam booth, and everyone watched. The prisoner was defiant to start with, but gradually fell silent, completely drained. Hordak looked at the Magna Beam indicator.
Bah! He'd less willpower than I'd hoped. We must capture more rebels.
Unfortunately for Adam, he too was on his way to the Magna Beam booth, although he didn't yet know it. He had transformed into He-Man, then captured a Horde trooper and put his uniform on. But Shadow Weaver and Hordak saw him on the view screen. They knew him at once.
He would be a source of great power,
said Shadow Weaver.
all the energy we need.
As He-Man marched into the Fright Zone, he suddenly saw Adora and hurried to her.
How did you get here?
She gasped. She started to draw her stun pistol, and he stopped her.
You don't need that,
he said.
You must know about the Horde by now.
What I know is that you are a lying rebel spy.
She said, her face hardening under Shadow Weaver's spell.
You are under arrest.
Now Hordak arrived with guards. He-Man put up a good fight, but he was soon overpowered. And then, there he was, in the Magna Beam booth. During the night, as He-Man's strength slowly drained away, Adora tossed and turned in her sleep. She muttered from time to time,
Oh, it's evil.
Then, through Adora's dreams, the sorceress called softly, and she woke up. After a moment, Adora said,
Something strange is happening. I must find out what it is.
She went straight to the plunder room. He-Man lay slumped in the booth, and the Magna Beam indicator stood at full. The two great swords were on a pedestal nearby.
Everything seems in order,
said Adora. Then she looked almost sadly at He-Man.
The strong rebel grows weaker, but it is for the good of the Horde. Why do I feel so unsure?
She turned to go. And the gem in the Sword of Protection suddenly glowed, startling her. The sorceress's face floated in the glow.
A rebel?
Asked Adora, confused. Her voice faded. Adora slowly raised the Sword of Protection. She repeated. Then,
I am She-Ra!
She cried, and smashed the Magna Beam booth. He-Man lifted his head weakly.
Who are you?
He asked.
A friend.
Said She-Ra. He looked across at the Sword of Power.
My sword.
Suddenly understanding, She-Ra tossed it to him. His strength flooded back and cried,
I have the power.
then turned to She-Ra.
Let's get out of here.
It was too late. Hordak had arrived on the scene. First, looked at the mana beam indicator.
My beam is fully charged.
He said, pleased. Then,
I don't know who you are,
he said to She-Ra.
but your rescue is too late. Guards, arrest these two rebels. I'm going upstairs to take care of the rest of the rebels with my Magna Beam.
With that, he went away,
What is this Magna Beam?
asked He-Man.
Don't ask.
Said She-Ra.
We must stop him.
I'll take care of that.
Said He-Man.
You go and warn the rebellion.
As He-Man started to fight off the guards, She-Ra turned and made for the stable and her horse, Spirit. But as she climbed on his back, he became Swift Wind, a winged unicorn, carrying She-Ra to warn the rebels. Now, He-Man was going after Hordak. He found him on the Fright Zone roof, just switching on the Magna Beam. But She-Ra had looked back as she flew away and had seen what was happening. She found a huge rock and threw it into the path of the beam. Both rock and beam disappeared instantly. Hordak was furious.
My Magna Beam! Wasted! Well, I still have some power left to try again.
But He-Man had other ideas. He gave the machine a mighty punch and split it down the middle. As it split, an enormous burst of energy was released. The energy spread outwards from the ruined Magna Beam, and when it reached the Horde's prisoners, it gave them their willpower. Without wasting a moment, they broke out and went back to Whispering Woods to help the rebellion. Hordak was white with rage.
I've still got you, rebel. I'm going to freeze you solid with freeze rays.
But he was wrong again. She-Ra swooped down on Swift Wind and lifted He-Man to safety, just in time.
Thanks,
Said He-Man.
No problem.
Said She-Ra.
What are sisters for, anyway?
sister.
Said He-Man, puzzled. She-Ra smiled.
He-Man, I think we've a lot to talk about.
She said. Deep in Whispering Woods, Swift Wind shone white in the moonlight. She-Ra stroked him while He-Man was speaking.
I don't understand. You're my sister, but I never had a sister.
I didn't know I had a brother until the woman in the sword told me so.
Said She-Ra.
The sword.
Said He-Man.
It must be the sorceress.
He lifted the sword of protection and called,
Sorceress! Can you hear me?
Its jewel gleamed, and the sorceress
Now I can answer all your questions. Years ago, twins born to the king and queen of Eternia. One of these babies was you, Adam, and the other was Adora. The king and queen were delighted, but their joy soon turned to sorrow. A terrible force called the Horde, led by a fiend called Hordak, tried to conquer Eternia.
The sorceress paused, looking back.
But they were no match for King Randor and my magic, and we defeated them. The Hordak, with his favorite pupil Skeletor, decided to steal both the Queen's babies in revenge. But they got only Adora, because Man-at-Arms caught the villains in the act. Hordak escaped with Adora, but Skeletor was caught and told us the way to Hordak's secret base. When Man-at-Arms and I arrived there to rescue Adora, Hordak was sitting at the gate, the baby in his arms. He said, "You may have defeated us, but you'll never see this child again." Then he went through the time gate. We never told Adam about you, Adora, because no matter how we searched, we couldn't find you.
There, the sorceress's story ended. As the sorceress's voice faded, She-Ra looked troubled.
But I can't just leave Etheria and go back to Eternia. The rebellion needs me.
You will have to think things over.
Said He-Man.
Now, How about giving your brother a big hug?
He-Man and She-Ra became Adam and Dora once more as they heard voices nearby in the woods. It was Bo and Glimmer arguing. They were startled to see Adam and Adora, and still more surprised to learn that Adora was Adam's sister,
I'm with the rebellion now.
said Adora.
I was always to the Horde because of Shadow Weaver's evil spell. Anyway, what's the argument about? Can we help?
My mother, Queen Angela, was the last ruler of Bright Moon. I've just found out she's a slave to Hunga, the leader of the Harpies of Talon Mountain. We must rescue her, but Bo thinks it's too dangerous,
Said Glimmer.
We can do that better than you.
Said Adora.
Just leave it to us. Let's go, Adam.
And as soon as they were out of sight, they became She-Ra and He-Man. As swift wind dipped towards Talon Mountain, He-Man and She-Ra on his back, Hunga the Harpy was watching on a view screen. Near her, Queen Angela was chained to the floor.
We have visitors!
Said Hunga.
Let us prepare a surprise!
So when She-Ra and He-Man burst in and raced over to free Angela from her chains, turned out to be Hunga the Harpy in disguise. Her force beams threw them to the floor to start with. Then she used her magic to put a cage round them. He-Man and She-Ra grinned at each other and brought their own magic into play. First, they destroyed the cage. Then they went after the Queen Harpy. She was soon tied up and gagged. They found Queen Angela and set her free,
Come on.
said He-Man.
Your daughter Glimmer wants to see you.
The rebels started to cheer and went on cheering as Queen Angela arrived. When she put her arms around her daughter Glimmer, they were both so happy they burst into tears. She turned to He-Man.
I was thinking, with Queen Angela back, the rebels will have a much better chance. I could go and see my mother and Thur in Eternia.
As Adam and Adora off in spirit, with Cringer going alongside,
There's one thing, Adora.
said He-Man.
Mother and father don't know I hate you to tell them you're She-Ra either.
He was speaking. Two Horde troopers saw him riding by,
That's force Adora.
said one.
We must tell Hordak.
Just as Adora and Adam were going through the time gate, Hordak arrived to see Adora disappearing.
She's not going to escape me!
He howled. Transforming to his rocket, he went through the gate after. On the other side of the time gate, in Castle Grayskull, the sorceress said,
Welcome back to Eternia, Princess.
Adora looked puzzled.
Princess?
You are the king and queen, remember?
Smiled Adam. Then the sorceress raised her hands, and the little party disappeared once more to find themselves in the royal palace of Eternia. When King and Queen realized that Adora was their long-lost daughter, they could hardly speak for joy. Even Man-at-Arms brushed away a tear as he told Tila,
She's Adam's twin sister, and she's back after all this time.
When Hordak first through the time gate and realized he was on Eternia, he made for Skeletor's hideout in Snake Mountain. Skeletor wasn't pleased to see Hordak again, and they began a tremendous... Hordak called a halt first,
It's stupid to fight like this.
he said.
I'm only here to recapture Princess Adora, daughter of King Randor. Help me to back, and I'll leave you in peace. You don't frighten me, Hordak!
Said Skeletor.
But I'll help you, if only to get rid of you.
Then he laughed wickedly.
I've just thought of a plan. Why, it'll be just like the old days.
Chuckled Hordak. The villain's plan worked. The royal family was having dinner when an enormous cake was wheeled in by 3 cooks. The cooks were really Skeletor and his villains, and Hordak was inside the cake. They took one prize. Adora was captured very quickly and taken to Snake Mountain. There she faced the time gate with Hordak. But Skeletor's idea was different. His villains threw Hordak through the gate, and Adora was taken to dungeons. This was her chance. Adora escaped, found her sword, and transformed to She-Ra. fighting away He-Man, Tila, Man-at-Arms, and Bat, who were on their way to rescue Adora.
The princess is safe!
She told them. When Snow Mountain grew quiet again, Skip could be heard saying feebly,
A female He-Man! This is the worst day of my life!
Back in the royal palace, Adora had sad news for the king and queen.
I'm afraid I must go back to Etheria to help against the Horde.
She said.
I will come home to you once more when my world is free.
We wish you would stay,
Said King Randor.
but we understand, and we're proud of you.
The moment Adora went through the time gate, she sensed there was still afoot. So she was glad to find she wasn't alone. Adam had come through the time gate behind her. They looked up to see the sky filled with Horde flyers, and with one Horde they transformed. He-Man on Battlecat and She-Ra on Swift Wind raced to join up with the rebels. She discovered she had yet more strange powers. She was even able to ask some of the animals to help in the fight to put Queen Angela back on the throne of Bright Moon. Hordak laughed as he saw the rebels moving in to attack the castle. Within seconds, he threw planes, tanks, stun cannons, and troops into action against them. Then He-Man and She-Ra came into the fight, and Hordak's laughter stopped. Not long after that, the rebels entered Castle Bright Moon. Queen Angela was back on the throne, and Hordak and his minions were defeated. He-Man went back to Eternia, but She-Ra stayed behind. As herself, or as Adora, Etheria needed her help. And if ever extra help were needed, He-Man would return.